So first of all, you might be asking what this thing is. Well, what this is basically, it's like a dial. You know how sometimes in like there's gear stops? So like whenever there's a gear, it always has teeth in it, which are basically these pointy parts. Now, there's a way to stop a gear from moving, and I'm gonna just use my fingers over here. And one of the things you can do is just clamp down in one of the teeth. So if I have a gear and I'm gonna just use my palm, and let's say these are my teeth, one way to stop them is by actually occupying a teeth. Now, think of this large fan base, our wrist one part, as an actual gear, and think of this mechanism as a gear stopper. So all it does is it just lands that one tiny little hook and it just clamps down on the gear. And that's pretty much all to it. So you might be also asking what this dial part is. Well, as you guys can know, this model will have to move, especially wrist 2. It's going to have to move from, left to right. So that dial's just there to serve as like a placeholder for any internal wiring they do. They're actually thinking about doing this manually. So what the patient can do is actually place their hand and just dial it from the outside, and they can just tighten it or loosen it. And that's basically saying, like, if a patient restricts her hand or his hand and locks it into one place, all they have to do is just turn this dial and they could just move it freely again. But if they want to lock it into place again, like over here, they just got to tighten the dial, and that's pretty much it. Now, with this little point over here, this little thing that's sticking out, I just kind of wanted to do a little bit more of a redesign with that part, especially with the whole tube paved in. So they're probably going to put like a magnet inside, but there are some difficulties with magnets, like for example, your skin getting stuck or little things like that. So they're actually thinking about just making the plate heavy enough so that gravity itself just makes the plate actually land on to your hand. So those are some points. If you guys are wondering how the internal works, the best way I can explain it to you is that they're probably going to need to have some sort of dial mechanism or electronic motor. Most likely, they're going to have to discuss this with our other mentor about what we should do. But know that there's going to be some mechanism inside that's going to be controlling everything. So with that said, that's a little bit with our internal mechanics. We're going to have a adjustable dial over here, a tightening dial, adjustable teeth, and internals inside. Now, is there any questions about how our device is going to function or what internal mechanics are? Like any outliers, questions? Okay, perfect. So with that said, all the contents or the changes they made are kind of minimal. So obviously they're going to have a base, rotating base over here. If you guys can actually see a little bit closer, what they have there is a bearing. Now, obviously some of you guys know what a bearing is because you've been to robotics, but if you don't know, a bearing is kind of like a gear that has balls inside them. It has 8 to 10 metal balls in there to reduce friction so that it can turn fast without having to damage the actual rotating parts. Now, we're not actually going to be rotating this at a speed in which a bearing is required because we're not actually putting like a power motor here and spinning it. But it's just one of those mechanical components that I'd like you guys to at least be informed about. So with that said, that's pretty much it to wrist 1. The gear teeth, like I explained, is a way to lock into position. So that's that. And now this part. Okay, so what our mentors did, I really never expected it to do it this way, but it's kind of amazing how they did it. But you know how our wrist 2 has like a solid block? Like think of like a gold bar. It's kind of like, it looks a little bit like that. Well, what they did was decide to put the internals inside of there. That's what their internals is. This is it. This box over here, that contains everything. Now, that certainly does work, because I was actually a little bit worried how they're going to wire something that is going to be wired to the center of wrist 1, as well as those 2 centers in wrist 2. I was really confused, like how they might actually do it, because if you think about it, a rotating part can't have internal wirings outside that also work with, you know, a not rotating part, a fixed part. Basically, it's not something you can do it easily. I'm sure there's ways to do it, but with like Bluetooth and stuff, but we really don't want to do that. We don't want to overcomplicate it. So what they told me was they're just going to put it all inside of this one box, so that this one box controls the rotating mechanism of wrist 2, this giant thing, while also controlling these 2 pins over here that actually rotate. So does anyone have any questions with that? Alrighty, and of course, this locking mechanism, the patient can easily just flip it on or flip it off just with their hand. Now this mechanism, this is what I talked about tightening and loosening. So if you guys can see over here, this kind of looks like a valve. This is the handle. You grab onto that handle and you spin it to tighten, and you unspin it to untighten. It's pretty simple. Now this part, wrist 4. I did talk to our mentors about how we usually have that split, but they just decided to cover everything into this one large shape. So basically think of it like a donut. When you dip it in glaze, it kind of like coats everything. Think of it like that. They're going to coat everything in plastic and then add wrist 4 to the sides. Now, in addition to that, they're also thinking about putting anti-friction pads. They're basically little plastic pads so that you don't slip inside the actual arm holder, so that even if you have a restraining device, you wouldn't need it that much, because there's an anti-friction pad. So with that said, is there any questions with that? Okay, perfect. Now that's pretty much the same. These are just dimensions, little specific things. Yeah, so just kind of repeating what I said. It's a little bit easier to understand now that there's a 3D model, but basically they're gonna put the internals inside of here. Now, I don't know if that's their final design. I feel like that's a really good design, but they're still not finalizing it. I think they're going to finalize it within a week from yesterday. So it's actually going to take them around, it's actually going to go until 20th for them to finish designing everything with like little details about internal mechanics. And then they're actually going to take like 2 weeks to actually build it, and they're probably going to send it. So with that said, this is like the little gear stopper design. Like I said, there's going to be like a little hook over here. That's the little hook. It's going to like clamp onto the actual gear teeth. Just some more external stuff. You know, obviously they got to do this in detail so that they can actually produce it. So with F1 and F2, obviously they made some of the changes. Like for example, now that there's like a hole here and a hole there. These 2 holes are where the actual hand cover is going to latch onto. So hopefully they'll probably change the shape, because this square over here looks a little bit obtrusive, but you know, it is what it is. They'll probably change it, maybe they won't. But yeah, instead of relying on any like gravity, or instead of like actually relying on like magnets, or what are they called, straps, I guess, and Velcros, they're not going to do much of that. They're just going to make gravity just put it into place. And they actually might put like the button over here. So you guys see this little pavement, circular pavement. Maybe there's going to be like a spring button, so that they can, if they want to release it, all they have to just press that so that it just pops up a little bit. So that's that. And of course, it's going to be the same with the left. And with the right, with this idea, I did want to ask them if they could kind of lower it a little bit, and they said they would. But we actually have to measure some hands, and not yours, but you know, some other people, especially like maybe some of our patients can kind of measure their hands, or any participants, they can also measure their hands, but of course, that's something later we're gonna have to worry about. So don't worry too much about that, but do know that we're gonna have to make some edits in the actual 2D model. But yeah, so that's pretty much it with our briefing. Everything else is pretty much the same as I said last time, but I want you guys to fill that Google form out, okay? And I'm gonna go over like 3 examples. Let me actually go over 1 example for each part so that every one of you knows what I'm talking about. Okay. So for risk 1, one feedback I could give or comment is maybe, let's see, 1 feedback. Okay, so 1 feedback I could give for risk 1 is reintroducing those cuts, but not on the top, but on the bottom. So they're gonna be pavements basically. So kind of like holes, but that are only cut halfway. Maybe we could put those in the bottom to reduce space or reduce weight. That's 1 feedback I could give in the Google form. For risk 2, 1 feedback I could give is maybe changing or maybe making it a little bit more accessible, this dial over here. Because think about it, if it's like a pretty large medical device and the patient's having their hand over here, they might have difficulty reaching all the way top. So maybe have one in the middle. That's a feedback I could give. For risk 4, one of the feedback could be, can we make it adjustable? Like, can we drill little holes over here so that we can kind of move it forward or backwards? Because, you know, not everyone has, because if you think about it, this part over here should be your arms. If someone has really short arms or short hands, they might have difficulty using the device. So that's one of the things you guys can think about. Oh, can we make this thing shift forward or shift backward a little bit? For F2, or F3, I should say, some things you can think about is maybe putting anti-friction pads over there too, so that people don't slip. Or maybe making it a little bit like a pavement so that this patient has like a clear way to put their hand without having to squish it in. So that's one of the feedbacks you could give. For fingers parts, let me just scroll down over here. Little minor things like, for example, maybe change the shape of this square so that it's not so obtrusive. And again, with this spring part, they're not decided on that yet. It's now what they're thinking is just like simple gravity design. So one of the feedback you can give is, hey, why don't we make it a spring assisted so that if a patient has difficulties, because if you think about it, just a gravity powered cover that just sits on top, it might get stuck. So why don't we have a spring assisted design at the bottom so that a patient just has to press a button and it just kind of like pops up a little bit so that patient can just remove it. For F2, or I mean F3 and F2, maybe, you know, maybe put pads inside here, silicone pads, or maybe anti-slipping pads, little things like that. They can input so that, you know, the patient's hand doesn't like slip outside, because that's definitely not something we want. So little things like that, I want you to please write down in the Google form. Now, once we get that finished, we're gonna have to give this to our mentor and they're gonna have to analyze it and they're gonna go over it. Now, one thing I do want you guys to take account is, well, it's not decided yet, but most likely, we're gonna have the device built in a couple weeks from now on. With that, we have to film like an instructional video. So starting from, let's say starting from June, you guys will actually have to come to these meetings, and we might actually have to hold these meetings in my house or someone else's house, just kind of like, you know, a little bit more proactive, basically, because there's a lot of work to make up in a short amount of time, but I think it's still doable. So, you know, our club's definitely going to continue throughout the summer. When the device is actually built and it's like sent to either the school or me, we're gonna have to work a lot. So it's gonna take note of that. I know a lot of you guys are in like a difficult position right now with AP testing and schools ending, finals. So don't worry about it. that time in our club, we're mostly going to be waiting for our mentors to actually build the device. But once that's over and we go to summer vacation, that's when we're actually going to have to do a lot of things. And from that time on, I'm hoping that COVID is bad enough, as in like there's not enough numbers to be a big problem anymore, so that where maybe the group leaders or hopefully everyone in the club can at least visit our mentor once. She can't visit us because she works in like a hospital, and of course she's in maternity leave right now, so she can't really do that. But I'd like for our mentors to meet at least once, because you know that's usually how a club functions, and this whole remote scheduling thing really kind of messed with that. So I'll be thinking about that. So just keep that in mind. All you have to do for now is fill out that Google form. Please do that by, well, until the next meeting, so the 21st. Please do that until the 21st. All you have to do is just write in one revision, one comment, one possible change. Don't worry, it doesn't have to be a good idea. All you have to do is just present an idea. So just do that by the 21st. And yeah, that's pretty much it. Do you guys have any questions? Okay, so it looks like everyone's good. That's pretty much it for our meeting. Thank you so much for coming. Yeah, take care, everyone.
Thank you.
Well, I just don't want to discourage them to, you know.
Jacob,
Yeah, what's up, Junseo?
one question. Which one is F and W3?
Risk 3?
Yeah.
So risk 3 is a part you actually like 3D models, right?
No, I modeled risk 2.
Yeah, this is risk 3. I know it's a little bit hard to see, but kind of think of it like they only did the top because the sides are basically like, you know, the same. So like, let me kind of zoom up here. I know they kind of like flattened it, but that's risk 3.
And how about risk 4?
Risk 4 are the sides.
How about risk 2?
Risk 2 is this thing over here, this gold bar looking thing.
And that's the one that spins?
What was that?
And that's the one that like rotates with that finger parts?
Yep.
Wasn't risk 3 supposed to be the one that rotates, not risk?
Oh, never mind. I must have gotten mixed up then. Yeah, that's risk 3 and that's risk 2 then. Sorry, I must have gotten mixed up.
Okay, all right.
Any more questions?
And you just glue risk 2 on the risk 4?
What was that?
You just glue risk 2 on risk 4?
They're gonna have like a, they're not gonna glue it, but they're probably gonna have like a plastic latch, so they kind of just latches on.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Alrighty, take care.
Bye.
Bye, Jim.